Hello, my name is John Malloy, Director of the Centre for Public Ethics at Martin Luther University College, based in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Welcome to The Moment, where we explore the choices we make together in support of the common good. You're listening to our special series entitled Beyond Culture Wars, Fostering Solidarity in an Age of Polarization, which looks at our upcoming 2024 conference to be held at Luther in Waterloo from April 18th to the 20th, exploring a more positive role for religion in countering our current culture wars mentality. Today we are in conversation with Ron Kuipers, Professor of Philosophy of Religion and the President of the Institute for Christian Studies, one of the co-sponsors of this event, and his colleague Héctor Acero Ferrer, Associate Director of the Center for Philosophy, Religion, and Social Ethics at the Institute for Christian Studies. Welcome, Ron and Héctor.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about the upcoming conference. Before doing that, I gave the titles that both of you have and your work at the Institute for Christian Studies. And in fairness, Héctor, you also do some work at Luther. But I thought maybe I'd just ask you to, and I'll start with Ron, to just tell us, take a couple of minutes and tell us about your research interests, the work that you do, and how that led you to be involved with a conference on polarization. So Ron, I'll start with you.
Thanks, John. So as you mentioned, I'm Professor of Philosophy of Religion at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto. And my work focuses on the continuing relevance of religious life patterns in a secular and increasingly post-secular Western societies. So I explore sort of those dynamics in conversation with a few different philosophical traditions like American pragmatism. So I've written a book on the work of Richard Rorty and critical theory of the Frankfurt School, and also philosophical hermeneutics and philosophy of language. So, I look at things like how religious language and forms of life carry meaning in our age. And in that way, I'm also interested in how religious folks and communities and culture inserts itself in a pluralistic democracy in ways that are, build solidarity, that edify society rather than divide and fracture it, I guess.
And Héctor?
Well, my research is on liberation theology and ecclesial-based communities. So basically how grassroots groups have developed ways to understand their political action in light of their faith calling. Also in polarized, often very violent contexts. So anything that has to do with that allows us to understand better what the role of religion could be to overcome polarization is of great interest to me.
And I guess that's the big question is we all talk about polarization, but what is polarization? And why would two individuals who are looking at philosophy, looking at religion, why would you be drawn to a very practical discussion, I guess, about how polarization is manifesting itself within faith communities and the larger world? What is the problem you see us trying to fix, and how do you see faith as making a contribution? And again, maybe I'll start with you, Ron.
Well, I would relate polarization to a certain kind of unhealthy and dangerous social fragmentation, right? I think in pluralistic democratic societies, given the history of Western liberal sort of political traditions, it's always had trouble managing diversity. The approach of toleration doesn't seem to be working. A lot of people still experience cultural difference, religious difference as threatening or as, and I think the problem's getting worse and not better. So, so it's basically, a concern for social cohesion, that honors the differences that exist and don't try to explain them away or ignore them or abstract them to a private sphere by looking at what we all have in common as human beings, let's say. But I think the difficulty in front of us in an age of polarization is to think about ways that we can find ways to work together, understand one another better, work through our mutual fears of each other. I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but I would define polarization as, at least what we want to look at in this conference, as an increasing form of societal fragmentation that could, eventually lead to, and has led to violence and basically just the breakdown of solidarity, so that a society like Canada can function as a unit. That's a big generalization because it hasn't really ever functioned as a unit throughout its entire history, and there's always been different groups in power. And but I guess one thing I come back to, there's a Canadian political philosopher named James Tully out of the University of Victoria, who's done a lot of work on Canadian constitutionalism and the historical treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada. But he has a book called Strange Multiplicity. And I love that book, but I also, on the cover is a picture of the sculpture, Bill Reed's sculpture called The Spirit of Haida Gwaii. And it's got about, a canoe filled with all these figures from Haida mythology on the same boat. There's some strife, there's some cooperation, but there's a kind of a recognition that they're all in the same boat going somewhere together. And I think the idea of fostering solidarity in an age of polarization is following someone like Tully's work, an attempt to come to better terms with the multiplicity that constitutes our society and to find ways to move forward together rather than ways that fracture or that seek to throw people out of the boat or something like that.
No, I mean, that's helpful. In other podcasts, and maybe I'll get Hector to jump in, I've raised the point that we seem to live in a world where each of us feel that we have our ideas and our opinions, which are the correct ones. We certainly do go out to find others that share those opinions, and then and form a community of sorts. But when we look at the rest of the world that doesn't share our opinions, we feel they're either misinformed or they're bad people, and that all we have to do is hope that they become educated, that they see the truth and come over to our side, or if they are bad people, that we can somehow marginalize them and make sure that, for heaven's sake, they don't get their name on a ballot or get elected, and they can be put off in the corner. I mean, I see this all the time, certainly in terms of public discourse, and I'm just wondering how you see this phenomenon and sort of the approach of the conference to addressing it, because there really is this sense of, I'm right and the rest of the world better get to my side. So Hector, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, now that Ron did the hard work of defining polarization, I can jump on that. I think that I will connect that to something that happens often in the context of class with students who are either young millennials or Gen Zs, and all their existence or most of their existence is happening online. And how the process you're describing is accelerated by an existence that is primarily happening online, where the difference is easily eliminated from the landscape of expectations of one's life and moving through the different motions of what it means to be human, and what it means to kind of hold our world in common. And I am a student of Ron, who uses a lot of Hannah Arendt in his teaching, and that idea of holding a world in common is very fragile, is very precarious, is somewhat of a miracle for us to be able to hold a world in common. And yet everything that we have, all our tools, especially anything IT related, is leading us at an accelerated pace to not hold a world in common. Is less and less people that we can hold a world in common with. So it is in conversation with the students that I go back again and again and again to the idea of what it means to be able to coexist with someone with whom you don't agree with. And and basically in like radical ways you disagree with someone who still is in your world somehow, physically in your world, but somehow not in your world online. So again, that's the situation we're dealing with. And now to the conference, what can faith, what can religion do in the wake of that, in the context in which people tend to be more and more isolated because of the structures that rule their everyday interactions with one another. And I think that faith has a lot to say about that, about what it means to be in community, what it means to be in community across boundaries of difference, and what it means to hold on to something that is very dear to you, a principle, a guideline, a set of doctrines, while still knowing that people on other religious contexts hold on to very, very different guidelines, principles, sets of orientations around life. So religions have a lot to say about that, and they have that wisdom that has been with them all along. So we somehow need to rescue that, bring that back to the conversation and see what we can do with it today in the settings that we live in North America now.
But let me ask, and maybe Ron, you want to pick up on this point. What about those people that would say, why would a group of religious folk or people interested in religion be holding a conference like this when in fact religion has been the source of so much polarization? This belief that not only am I right, but I'm right because God told me I'm right, means that everyone else in the world, I may have some sort of human compassion for them, but I certainly look down upon them because they weren't fortunate enough to be as right as I am. I mean, that's certainly a caricature of religion. There is this issue of truth within religion. So what would you say to those critics that say we are the last people on earth that should be having this discussion?
Part of me, or not part of me, but I think people who identify as religious, whether Christian or otherwise, have to take ownership of that legacy, because what you've described is true historically. Religion has been a source of polarization, right? Really, the whole, if you look back, going back to people like John Locke and Hugo Grotius, who sort of are the architects of liberal democracy, a lot of the whole project was to contain religious strife from the wars that had divided Europe after the Reformation, right? So liberal democracies from their inception were born to contain and police divisive religious difference. And in the case of Europe, it was religious difference interior to the Christian faith, right? Different Christian sects, persecuting each other and that sort of thing, and fighting wars against each other. So this volatility of religion, it's a legacy that's been with us, as long as liberalism has been, but also predates it. So my first response would be to sort of cede that point, actually, because, but then to add that, I would definitely add that to me is not all religion can be or must be or even should be. So one of the things that, when we're talking about things, ideas like things like truth and everything like that can get pretty, we can get pretty philosophical about this. But I think one of the things I want to say is that there has been a tendency in Western religious civilization to collapse faith into belief, into intellectual belief or intellectual assent to doctrine or dogma. I think then what happens then is that if I believe, these 6 sentences or these 6 creedal propositions to be true in terms of, empirically correct descriptions of reality, there's different definitions of truth, right? And we identify our faith with that, then we are automatically put in this hubristic position where I have the truth, and to the extent that people don't agree with these beliefs, they live in falsity or something like that. And to me, that's an epistemological paradigm, to use a big philosophical word, that isn't necessary for us to adopt. We don't have to have that understanding of truth. but that's, it is a very dominant understanding of what truth is, right? So my friend from the King's University in Edmonton argues that religious people should think of truth more in terms of faithfulness, which is a way of, talks about describing more of a way of living out of your religious commitments faithfully. And there are beliefs involved and principles and things you're taught and catechized about that you believe to be true, but you hold them differently because they're not the same as the faith itself. They're historical attempts to articulate what the faith is at certain times in history for certain people, what they agree about, what they disagree about. But I always feel it's a bit of a fatal mistake to identify faith with belief in that sense of intellectual assent to creeds, dogmas, propositions, because if you look even within the scriptures of the Christian tradition, you'll see human beings struggling for what it means to follow the path God is calling them toward, codifying it in certain ways at certain points, and then later on saying, no, we have to do it differently now because we're being called in a different direction. So there's a way of thinking about your faith that allows great scope for when you take up your tradition and carry it forward into your present and into the future, into a new time and a new context. There's scope for faithful innovation. There's scope for change. There's scope for openness to difference. There's scope to receiving criticism from others who don't share your faith if they can draw attention to some of its more baleful effects, like you mentioned in your lead up to this question. So I would encourage people to carry themselves, think of what it means to carry yourself faithfully in the world. And I think that comes with a certain amount of epistemic humility, or humility about whether or not you have the truth, whether or not you have a direct pipeline to God, or whether or not that's what the Bible does for you, if that's the way to read it, if that's the way to take inspiration from it. So, those are a lot of traditional stances that I believe lead into the kind of tribalism and polarization that you're seeing at an alarming rate within Christian evangelicalism in particular. One of our keynote speakers, Kristen Kobes-Dumais, has really explored the history of that in the last 100 years. And she has on her website, she just recently posted an article called The Thickening Webs of the Christian Right. And she names real people who are advisors of Trump, who, if he's elected, their agenda, as far as I can tell, is to basically install Margaret Atwood's Gilead on the United States. It's almost identical to what she... So, and you can only carry off a political project like that, or even want to, if you believe you have all the truth and everybody, to the extent they disagree with you, are irredeemably wrong and are not worth including in your political vision. Now, I believe that's an idolatrous sellout to power, and I don't believe that's the path that Jesus Christ called people to. Strongly disagree that it is. And I think our conversation is about naming the polarization, first of all. It's not about papering over it, saying, hey, there's a different way and it's a better way and just follow this way. We're going to look at some hard stuff for what it is. And it's a growing concern. And to the extent that groups who have this kind of hubris actually get the levers of political power, it's going to be bad news for almost everybody. So really, for me, this conference is about facing that more squarely. Like, I don't know about you, but it's kind of snuck up on me, the amount of power and suasion and even size of these polarizing movements. And then it also behooves us to kind of witness to a different way of being religious, a different way of being Christian, one that is more humble, more inclusive, and considers solidarity, real, like justice and peace for everyone in a particular society. Takes that seriously as something worth defending and striving for.
No, I mean, I agree with you. It has snuck up on us, and I think the whole sense of solidarity is. I mean, people like to talk. The great way we're all going to love one another, and we judge our society by how we treat each other and that sort of thing. And we say these things, but we don't live them out, and we certainly don't live out solidarity. Solidarity is, it seems to me, is fine as long as that person either, agrees with you, or you have this patronizing view that as long as they, are educated, they'll come around to your way of thinking, as opposed to simply respecting them. So it's a fascinating discussion.
Well, Hector mentioned Hannah Arendt and the idea of holding a world in common. And I think what we have to understand is that's when and where it occurs, it's a fragile achievement. It's not something that we can count on as pre-existing. Yeah. And it's something we have to create together. And you have to have the will and desire to create that together. The opposite of that is going tribalistic, withdrawing from a world, not bothering to think about the importance of sharing the world with each other, right? And that is the legacy of European settler colonialism in North America, was an unwillingness to hold the world in common with the people that were here already, right? So we're talking about something that has deep roots in Western civilization in terms of ways of understanding, the barbarians at the fringes of empire, or, and I think those, so you're absolutely right, John. It's you can sound Pollyannish about it, but it really is something that you have to continuously work for, and it will never be perfectly achieved, but it's a walk, not a talk, right? Like, I think that's something I'd say.
And that brings us to the conference itself. And Hector, do you want for listeners to walk through a little bit about, we've already mentioned one of the keynotes, but perhaps you can expand on the two keynotes that will be there, what the sessions will look like. It begins on April the 18th on a Thursday evening. And for people who are interested in coming to it, what's going to be happening?
Well, lots of content for folks interested in this topic. So first, we begin at 7 p.m. on Thursday with Kristen Cobes-Dumais. She is going to talk to us about Jesus and John Wayne, Christian nationalism, and the evangelical reckoning. So that's a big title. She's bringing a lot of her recent research, as well as her what she did for Jesus and John Wayne, the book that is a bestseller now. So that we open up the conference with that on the evening on the Thursday, April 18th. Our second keynote is the next evening, Friday the 19th at 7 p.m. as well. And that's with James Smith, a philosopher from Calvin University. And the title of that is The Mystic Crucible of Unknowing, From Culture Wars to Contemplative Spirituality. So inhabiting the present in a new way. We're going to hear that from him. And we have many other exciting things happening during the conference. We're closing actually with a play by a local theater company, Theater of the Beat. They are going to adapt one of their plays based on the outcomes of the conference. So exciting things happening throughout. And so you have to stay tuned. You have to participate in it to be able to fully enjoy what happens there at the end. We'll have a couple of workshops on expressive arts and polarization. So really neat stuff coming from the folks at Luther who are doing a lot of work on expressive arts. We also have a couple of conversations with our keynote speakers. They are happening in the mornings, the morning after conversation happening with each one of them. So on Friday morning, we'll be with Kristen, and on Saturday morning with Jamie Smith. So that's a bit of the content. We also have participation by Citizens for Public Justice, Shalem Mental Health Network, Thrive Ministries, and also the Canadian Council of Churches. So great. It's lots of content, lots of practical content as well, lots of academic content, lots of blended content. We're hoping to give our audience a taste of the two worlds, the campus and the community worlds that are feeding into this conference.
And I think we should stress that this is open, obviously, to everyone, but we encourage everyone. You don't have to be an academic or even involved with, you don't have to be a pastor to come to this. I mean, ordinary folks who are just interested in the state of the world are welcome, right?
Absolutely.
And just to I said this at the beginning, but just so that people know, it's at we're going to be having some venues around the university, but it's at Martin Luther University College, which is at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo. It's located on the campus there in Waterloo, Ontario, from April 18th to the 20th. And although I'll say this at the end, for more information, the Luther's website, luther.wlu.ca, has the information that's on it. So we only have a few minutes left, but I want to talk a little bit about your expectations of the conference. I'm sure you're seeing this as a foundation for moving forward to promote certain ideas, to see certain conversations start that are going to continue on. Do you want to just speak a little bit about that? And I don't know, maybe I'll start with you, Hector, this time. What are your expectations over the longer term for this gathering?
This gathering also builds on a gathering we had last year in collaboration with ICS, Luther, and that was done with the Canadian Interfaith Conversation, also a conference on polarization. In that context, it was more interfaith than it was ecumenical. So we set some of the groundwork back then, coming into this discussion with all the questions we had around polarization. I'm a student of Vatican II, so Vatican II has one of those great moments where it says people come to the religions with their questions about existence and meaning, and that was what happened last year. This year is a year in which we are kind of gathering the setting of Christianity. We are trying to revisit those questions, try to find, Ron mentioned it earlier, this is not about finding solutions, but somehow it is about gaining some of that epistemic humility, that we come into the discussion as Christians, by Christians who have very different understandings of the world and what it means to be faithful in the world. But we are coexisting, and that our goal is to act in solidarity. So that's our next step, going to the community, developing ways to understand how we navigate that epistemic humility, and hopefully continue going forward with more of these opportunities for people to come together in conversation, to figure out what their communities have to say about the political world as well, and how they can contribute to it, and to heal some of the fractures that we've been talking about. And eventually, that there can be very pointed action calls for us and for our communities going forward, that this doesn't stay there, that this doesn't stay in the context of those sessions, that people get re-energized by conferences and then the momentum kind of fades away. We want people to go into their communities with the tools they gain at the conference and do their own projects that seek to address, to counter, to try to understand the polarization they themselves are living.
And Ron, what's your expectation just to build on what Hector said?
Yeah, I would like to build on what Hector said, because we have mentioned the idea of epistemic humility, and the adjective epistemic is important there because I think the humility should be in relationship to one's sense of intellectual certainty, that you have absolutely all the questions answered, everything right, know exactly what God wants. That kind of certainty, I think, does need to be sort of humbled, but I don't think that at the same time necessarily harms the confidence with which you carry your faith and your faithfulness, right? And your trust in the light that shines on any situation. It's not the same thing as the intellectual light that's cast from what what we might have learned in terms of what we think is what our beliefs are or whatever. So there's this kind of difficult balance that I hope that will curate a space where people, especially searching Christians who might be unhappy with the state of polarization, the state of this kind of polarizing, the sense of certainty that leads to polarization, but not knowing necessarily how they can continue to carry themselves as Christian and have their faith enter into life in a different way. And I'm hoping that the conference will offer people some strategies for thinking about, so that it's not just if we're going to criticize this sense of epistemic certainty, or encourage a certain epistemic humility, that doesn't mean you have to, that we're pulling the existential rug out from under people of faith or something like that. I think it's really important to make that distinction. It's about, if faith is about springboard into life and into the situations in which we find ourselves both joyful and problematic, then can we have a conference where people can explore the possibilities that faith affords beyond seeking a kind of certainty that might cause you to write other people out of the picture or something like that? I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think there are a lot of Christians today who are unhappy with the current state of Christendom and not just the big bad secular world. And I'm really hoping the conference will give people struggling with questions like that a safe place to explore different ways their faith might become manifest in a pluralistic, polarized society.
Well, let me tell you, I mean, you said, does it make sense? It makes sense to me, but I want to be provocative right at the end and say that if this is, because as we're sort of wrapping up, if this is about everybody's welcome, then those extreme voices out there that are claiming that they're right, are looking to, run for office or influence policy or take positions that we may not only oppose but find threatening. They have a role. Then they have a place in this discussion as well. And I'm wondering how you kind of deal with that. Deal with some voices that we may collectively find just are oppose what we're trying to do, but at the same time recognize their right or to be part of the conversation. How do you? I mean, it's a tough one, but it's one I think that has to be dealt with, because if we just dismiss we don't want this to be, I think you would agree, we don't want this conference to be, okay, most of us dismiss 40% of the population. People at this conference only dismiss 20% of the population. I mean, how do you get to that point where we're all choosing to live together, even some people who, well, I'll say it, are wearing MAGA hats and, we see interviewed on television and roll our eyes? Anyone?
No, that's an amazing question. Hector, do you want to say something? Like, I can
go first,
jump in, I guess, and try. But well, and I mean this seriously. Like, you have to fight the tendency to dismiss them as human beings, right? I mean, if you're going to be consistent Christian, you believe that all human beings were created in the image of God and equal, and and you have to look at everyone on that basis. So for someone like myself to write off the person in the MAGA hat is just beyond the pale or deplorable or something like that, which are, thoughts that occur to you naturally as a human being. But I think they're thoughts you have to struggle against. That doesn't answer the question then about how do you actually build a real bridge over a divide like that that's growing larger by the day. And also how you are to sort of politically interact with a group that really wants to get the levers of power to impose their way on the majority the rest of the population. We're in a moment now, I think especially our brothers and sisters in the US, where they do have to fight against this political movement, because it would mean the end of democracy and the end of solidarity amidst difference, right? Which, really, whatever you think about the American political experiment, it was about bring us your huddled masses, and it was about part of it at least was about a political project that was seeking, in Arendt's words, is how best together can we make a world fit for human habitation. So there's lots of examples where, if you go back to Third Reich in Germany, where a group in power decides one other group ought not to exist on the face of the earth. If something like that is emerging in the States, you can't tolerate that. Anyway, so it's both. You hold both in tension, because I think if you believe someone's in the grip of a vicious ideology or idolatry even, that doesn't mean you don't love them as a human being or a person in the biblical sense, right? Like agape, or care about them, or care about the condition they're in, or what has them in their grip. I think it's a destructive path they're on, for themselves as well as for the people that would be excluded by their vision. But that's a very, very difficult question, John. There's no, for me, easy answer. And, you want to grab both horns of the dilemma, because the second you just disparage and write off and exclude, you're playing the same game, and that's the game you're criticizing. So, but at the same time, if you are really witnessing the rise of something violently fascist, you have to become a Dietrich Bonhoeffer and fight it. I think.
Hector, do you want to jump in?
Well, Ron was again taking the harder part of the question and trying to solve it. I was thinking about a bit of the process as opposed to kind of the outcome of it. I'm a big believer in like the power of community, like as an intimate space where people really know one another. And when we think about the groups that are polarized, we think about them at large. They are groups in North America, in the States, and but people in those groups still inhabit small local communities, small local churches. That's still part of their life. And to me, that is the place where the answers to our problems begin to emerge, where people inhabiting those particular communities get to interact with others who are in radical difference from them. And that is the kind of conversation we want to facilitate or model for people. What will happen in your small community when you interact with someone who is so radically different? You can't hold a world in common, which is an achievement, as Ron just mentioned it. So that person, because you know them in an intimate setting, is a person, is an actual human being you're interacting with. The person in the MAGA hat, quote unquote, is not a person, is a category. So for me, it's always about the process. It's always about bringing it back to the level of the community. That's why I have a lot of hope in these small settings in which we can bring community people together so that they can model things within their own communities. Even if it's not solutions to the problems, at least model that kind of presence that we're called to be as Christians. I always go back to something, John, you and I talked about in the context of class. Well, maybe we are just here to hear each other's laments, and we can move past that. Well, Vatican II again. What am I called to do as a Christian? To be the echo of the joys and sorrows, the grief and anguish of the people who are across the way from me. So in that context, maybe just hearing each other's lament will reshift the kind of conversations and the kind of interactions that we are having. But what I'm afraid of, and this is where I get very much to be in despair some days of the week, is that we've ceased to have the ability to hear the lament of the person across the way. And again, we need to reattune our ear to hear it. And that's what we're here for.
Well, it's certainly a very important discussion. It's becoming important, I think, almost by the day. And, I just want to say how delighted we are that we could join with you to sponsor this conference. Again, the conference Beyond Culture Wars, Fostering Solidarity in an Age of Polarization. It'll be taking place from April 18th to the 20th at Martin Luther University College in Waterloo. And it's being co-sponsored by Luther and the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto. So I want to thank our guests, Ron Kuipers and Héctor Acero Ferrer from the Institute of Christian Studies for joining us today to talk about the conference. If you're interested in registering for it, as I said earlier, please visit Luther's website, luther.wlu.ca, under the Spotlight section. There you'll find more information about registering and also any questions you have about the conference itself and its program. It's $75, a bargain for the Thursday night to the Saturday afternoon, with a series of keynote speakers, workshops, and great activities. So again, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Hector. I think it's going to be a great conference, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of The Moment, a production of the Center for Public Ethics at Martin Luther University College, the founding institution of Wilfrid Laurier University, located in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Visit our website, luther.wlu.ca, for resources and more information on other podcasts. The technical producer of today's recording was Christopher Macheline, with support from Alex Kinsella. Creative Commons music was provided by Jason Shaw on audionautics.com. Thanks for joining us.